La 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 la. Dog hair. It's good. Thank you for getting your hair all over me. You thoroughly claimed me, dogs. Oh boy. Okay. We're good. Let's get into it. Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. Have you noticed that lately games have been really long? Just like so long, right? Everybody talks about how this new game is 80 hours long, 100 hours, 120 hours, 150 hours. And I don't know, it seems to me that that's frequently considered a selling point. Like this JRPG, which is what I talk about here, right, is 120 hours to complete. That's astonishing. Look at the value you get for your money. You're spending $70 on it brand new, but you're getting 120 hours of gameplay out of it. That's incredible. Like, that's an amazingly well spent $70. I can kind of see that perspective, sort of, in like just a bare bones sort of mathematical way, but it doesn't really, I don't know, make sense to me personally, the way I play games, the way I enjoy them. The length of time, the quantity of game is far less important to me than the quality of the experience. So I want to talk about a few games that I feel like are just too long. Now, this came up on our podcast. We were talking recently about, I don't even remember what the subject was. It wasn't games that were too long. But one of my co-hosts brought up the fact that the Persona games, like, great, everybody loves Persona, and I love Persona. I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying. I love Persona. It's one of my favorites. It's fantastic. It is too long. They're too long. They're just absolutely, without a doubt, too long. And the reason I think that is because it is not 120 hours of pure story in Persona 5 Royal, for example, which was about how long it took me to beat it with the new path and everything. The original Persona 5, 100 hours. Persona 5 Royal added 20 additional hours to the game. You know, again, for your money, that sounds like, hey, a pretty good deal, right? But it wasn't 120 hours of pure, unadulterated story, right? There was a decent amount of additional story in the Royal version of the game, and there's a decent amount of story just in the core games themselves. Persona 5, just the vanilla Persona 5 had an amazing story. Same with Persona 4, same with Persona 3. Just some of the best JRPG storytelling out there. However, these games are excessively long, and it's not because of their stories, okay? It's because, in the case of Persona at least, and I think this also applies to Metaphor, I haven't played it yet, but I've heard people talk about it, and they've used very similar language to explain kind of where they are in the story when they're talking about Metaphor. It's because Persona and presumably Metaphor use a calendar system to dictate the flow of gameplay, meaning you are, for the most part, playing at least excerpts of the character's day, each and every day that transpires over the course of the story. And with a story like the Persona games tend to have, not all that much is happening every single day. There are a few days throughout the course of the semester or the calendar year, whatever, however you want to measure it, where significant things do happen. And those are the exciting kind of peaks of the story, right? You've got your encounters with the big baddies of the dungeons or palaces or whatever. Like those events are important, and you don't want to take anything away from those. But it's the in-between moments that are padded out excessively, to the point where I am doing repetitive tasks over and over and over and over again because, I don't know, I want this completely arbitrary stat to go up. Like, I want my charm to increase, and I'm basing my gameplay around these sorts of almost invisible stats that I know I want to improve because ... It's not always clear even what we're doing it for. Now, in the case of like Persona or Persona 3, which is I played most recently, the Reload version, you know, like I need to get my charm up if I want to be able to talk to certain characters, or I have to get my academics up if I want Mitsuru to pay attention to me, or whatever the case might be, right? Like, there are reasons for it, but the activities that you have to undertake to increase those stats are not fun. They're just not fun. Like, you can't tell me that it's fun to every night after school go to the mall, go to the coffee shop, and work a shift at the coffee shop where you read the same text every time in order to improve your charm and courage or whatever they increase there. And I'm thinking as I'm playing the game, I'm like, oh, I need to do this because not only is it increasing my charm, it's also increasing my courage, and it's paying me. So like, look at how effective I'm being. Look at how well I'm using my time. I'm not using my time well. Okay? In the context of the game, sure. In the context of making the invisible numbers go up, yeah, I guess. But it's not great. It's not fun. It's not engaging. It is addictive. It's just addictive. They have the right sound effects, the right visual effects on the screen to make it appealing when those stats increase. And then when you level up, oh my gosh, when you level up, it is glorious. You feel elation. And that's great, right? That's fine. I'm not saying that these good feelings are bad. I'm just saying the drudgery that it takes to get to them is ridiculous and kind of pointless. And it's not just Persona, right? Or Metaphor. Like, they get talked about a lot for being very long, but it's an epidemic across the entire industry. Like, these games are so long. Even the games, like other games that I love, the Trails series, they are so freaking long, right? Like, they are, I think there's not a single mainline Trails entry whose story is not at least 40 hours, right? Like, just the main story is more than 40 hours, and it goes up, right? It's not just like they all sit around 40 hours. I think the exception to that is the third, which is actually a good kind of case in point. I feel like the third is fantastically paced, and it's a really, really great example of how to show restraint with your storytelling and with your gameplay to just deliver a solid kind of concise experience that's enjoyable. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the super long ones. And, you know, for the Trails series, like, I'm a little bit less critical of Trails than I am of Persona, even though we're talking about length as being kind of the problem or like evidence of the problem. I think with Trails, for the most part, the time spent is on doing more interesting things. Like, I'm not just doing the same activities over and over to increase a stat. Like, I'm doing a side quest, I'm having a character specific event, and these aren't events that repeat over and over either, right? Like, these are unique events, and you can play through the game multiple times because in like the Cold Steel arc, for example, you only have limited amounts of free time to be able to spend with the characters. So I'm less critical of the Trails games for their length because I feel like, at least compared to, say, the Persona games, they're using that time more effectively. It's more interesting to me to play those things than it is to grind stats in Persona, if that makes sense. But yeah, if every game... So I was looking on, I looked on How Long to Beat at the Trails series, and it's like around 1,000 hours to complete what has been released so far of the Trails series in the West. That's an incredible amount of time. How much time is that? Calculator. Okay, so 1,000 hours. How many days of my life is that? So if we take 1,000, divide by 24, that's 42 days of my very finite life that playing the Trails series has taken up. And I don't regret it. Honestly, I don't regret playing Persona 3 or 4 or 5 or again 5 Royal. Like, I don't regret these things. I just think that they don't need to be that. And actually, you know what? With Trails, I've played through it multiple times. So 42 days, probably times at least 2.5. We'll say about 100 days. 100 days. Close to a third of a year. That's... I actually feel kind of sad. Like I said, I don't regret playing the games. I love the games. I love the series. But it's like, man, life is so short. Should we even be doing this? Should we go outside? Maybe we should just go outside and like make a friend or something. I gotta go. No, I'm kidding. I can't go. I'm not gonna go outside. Are you kidding me? That's never gonna happen. I'm at home here. This is where I belong. So I remember when 40 hours was the longest game that I had ever played, and that was Xenogears. I remember beating the game, and my timer came in at something just over 40 hours, and I remember being like, man, that was the longest game I have ever experienced in my life. And it was great. Like, I loved every minute of Xenogears. And of course, I was 16 at the time, so naturally all time felt longer. But you know, I guess maybe I've gradually built up tolerance to these things to the point where 60 hours doesn't feel that crazy anymore. 60 hours, honestly, in the scope of the games we're talking about, 60 hours feels great. What a great thing to have, a 60-hour game, and I can play it and be done, right? Like, that's amazing. The real difference here, and I've been primarily talking about time to beat as far as, like, main story, right? Like, that's my particular focus, is just getting through the main story. That's what I care the most about. If I really enjoy the gameplay or certain aspects of the gameplay, I'll delve into some extras, but I'm really just primarily talking about main story, time to beat. And like I said, I used how long to beat to kind of look up some of these games that I'm thinking of, and I'm debating, like, are these too long? What's the deal? And to me, the big shift comes when you compare main story to, you know, main story plus extras, or even main story versus completionist. Like, it's an immense amount of content that is put into these games that already have very long main stories. Like Persona 5, a lot of the stuff that you do in Persona 5 is extra. You don't have to do it. But so much of the stuff that I kind of have an issue with, the sort of monotonous stat grinding stuff that happens in between major story events, that's baked into the main story. You can't skip that. You can't bypass it. Like, that's part of the main story pass, so that's calculated in there. Some of these games I'm talking about, like Trails with the side quests and character events, like, they're not required. You could technically skip them. I wouldn't want to do that, but you might, and that's fine. And so you're going to have a shorter experience, and you're going to probably be happy because that's probably what you want if you're skipping things, right? But the amount of discrepancy in the times between, like, the main story and the extras or completionist is bonkers. Like, and this is something, I guess, that I just fundamentally don't understand as far as the perspective of the developers goes. I understand, like, for a free-to-play game or a subscription-based game, or don't even get me started on mobile, right? Like, the idea there is to addict you to the gameplay or make number go up, whatever it is, so that you continue to spend time on that game and you're more likely to spend money or spend more money on that game. Totally makes sense to me. I get it. Like, I don't like that, but I understand it. And I've played some games and enjoyed some games that have that mentality, like Honkai Star Rail, for example. Like, I think that game is tremendous. It's tremendous in spite of the problematic issues with the way it kind of disrespects your time, right? As any gacha game or any kind of, like, free-to-play game tends to do. They're not respecting your time. They're kind of demanding your time and getting you hooked so that you eventually spend money on it, right? But with a game like that, it's free or whatever. Like, do developers feel like they need to make single-player role-playing games a similar sort of experience? Like, do they need to be that long? Like, if I pay $70 for a 20-hour experience, am I going to feel cheated out of that $70? No, I don't think so. Like, $70 for 20 hours of enjoyment, if it's truly an enjoyable experience, that's a great deal. That's fantastic. Like, amazing, right? Like, you spend $70, like, what do you get for $70 out in the real world as far as entertainment goes? Put video games to the side, right? Like, how many movies can you see on $70? How, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very, I don't know, it's a very different sort of thing, but I don't, what am I saying? And, like, I would pay $80. I'd pay $80 for a shorter experience like that, 25 hour game. It's not even the length of the game that matters to me, right? It's the quality of the experience I'm having. There's this tendency in the development community right now to pad out these games so that they're so long that you're spending so much time, and I guess the perceived value of the game goes up. And I guess that helps. I mean, at that point, it makes you more likely to buy the next game, maybe, because at that point, you've already bought the game, right? Like, you've purchased the game, it's yours. You're not likely to return it. I mean, if you do, that's kind of gross. If you buy a game and play through it and then return it, I think that's gross. Don't do that. Like, you had an experience, you should pay for it so that people get paid for their work. Like, please, that's just decency. But like, I guess the thought is that you are, endeared to the company, and so you're likely to buy the sequel or whatever because you saw the counter at the end of the game that said you spent 84 hours playing this game, and you're like, wow, what an amazing value I got. 80 hours. That's less than $1 an hour, right? Like, it's like, I don't know. When the game is truly engaging, I don't mind a longer game. Like I said, Trails, very long, but I find them pretty engaging throughout. Not to say that there's never been a lull or a dip in the quality within a Trails game, but by and large, I find those experiences to be top tier. With games like Persona, and I'm assuming Metaphor, again, I'm just assuming, I haven't played it, but based on what people have said, there's a similar sort of gameplay flow where you're kind of locked into this calendar system and you are going to play every day, whether there's anything interesting that happens on that day or not. I don't know. Am I crazy? Like, do you feel like I'm fundamentally misunderstanding something about why games are being designed like this nowadays? Like, do you agree with me? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Like I said, this came up on our podcast, and I've just been thinking about it a lot since then. And the idea of games respecting my time, respecting our collective time by not choosing to be bloated with repetitive, addictive types of gameplay. To me, that's like an indicator that the game developers are confident, first of all, in their game. Like, if they don't have to put in these well-researched and understood triggers and things into their games that make us, our silly lizard brains, want to make the number go higher or whatever. Like, if they're confident enough in their gameplay and in their storytelling, they don't need to put stuff like that in there because, we're going to have a great time with the game regardless of that stuff being in there. Do you, maybe I'm just like on the outskirts of what's in or what's favorable right now. Like, do you enjoy that sort of like stat grinding in Persona where you're, maximizing your time, and I'm going to do this today, and I'm going to do this other day, and I'm going to raise this social link over here, and then I'm going to whatever. Like, do you find that enjoyable? To me, that's not the most engaging thing. Like, that's not the most interesting thing about the Persona games to me, but I'd be curious if that's like one of your primary interests. Like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah, I guess that's it. I just wanted to drop in with a little video talking about some long games. It's going to be a long weekend here coming up, and I think a lot of us are probably going to be busy. I'm going to be busy. So I wanted to bring this forward, just kind of start a conversation. If you're interested, drop your comments below. If you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, if you find the stuff that I do here interesting or entertaining or whatever, it really helps the channel a lot. If you've watched more than one video and you keep coming back, if you wouldn't mind subscribing, it really means a lot to make the number go bigger. I guess everything's a game, right? Everything's gamified. We're stuck. We're trapped. We're trapped in it. I'm trapped in it. God help me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, for subscribing, for commenting, for all of the stuff that you do. I really appreciate it. And until next time,